Welcome everybody to Acts 28, number 30 in our video series showing that Acts 28 is in fact the great New Testament dispensational divide. Last time in our video we saw that in the third month, as recorded in Exodus chapter 19, the Lord descended onto a mountain with a trumpet, with clouds, and a voice, and angels, and fiery judgment. And on the third day, Israel were gathered at the base of the mountain. This is in a context of the festive calendar, the weekly Sabbath, which sits at top of Leviticus 23, tying this purpose of redemption for the earth back to Genesis, where God dwelt with people in a wonderful garden paradise. And the land flowing with milk and honey, which is typified at the Feast of Tabernacles when Israel entered the land, and which prophetically, as the prophet Isaiah says, will be like Eden, joins the redemptive purpose for the world that started in Genesis to that great book of prophecy, the book of Revelation. And this is nothing but a series of steps that God took to deliver His seed, the great nation of Abraham, bringing them into a land where they would serve Him in service with the tabernacle and temple and be manifestations of His glory and salvation unto the ends of the earth. In this festive calendar, there are things which are for us. In the temple services, we have the shed blood. We have holiness and righteousness. We have sin and sins being transferred. We have the bearing of sin on the sacrificial animal. We have identification and reconciliation. These things are for us. But the festive calendar is not about us today as members of the church, which is His body, who are associated with a purpose, a redemptive purpose in the above heavens. These things are about the earth and God's redemptive plan for the world. Now what I would like to do today, and I do not apologize for the repetitiveness of these videos. As Paul said, repeating things is not injurious but beneficial. Here at Pentecost, we remember in the third month, certainly around Pentecost, there were supernatural gifts. And those supernatural gifts were given so that those gifted could make Aaron's garment, the high priest garment. And Christ is the seed of Abraham, and these steps show forth His suffering to glory, don't they? But they show forth Him as the high priest, dwelling between the cherubim in Israel's temple when He descends with a cloud and a voice and angels and fire, and removes the man of sin and dwells on His throne there, when all of this is fulfilled. So certainly the Lord's steps from suffering to glory are also here contained. And the believers in the Gospels and the Acts period, up until Acts 28, Paul in Galatians calls them the seed of Abraham by faith. And they therefore were rejoicing in the fulfillment of these steps. And up until Acts 28, Passover had taken place. The first fruit of unleavened bread had taken place. Pentecost had been fulfilled at Acts chapter 2. And they were waiting for trumpets, weren't they? Now today I want to emphasize yet again that at the third month in the type of Israel's redemption and the redemption of those associated with her, remember, just because Gentiles were saved in the Acts period does not mean that our calling had begun. We'll deal more with that in due course. But when the Lord descended with a trumpet, a cloud, and a voice, Israel was gathered at the base of the mountain. Remember, you can read about it in Exodus 19 and also the book of Hebrews. But there was a second meeting at the trumpet coming of the Lord. Moses, as Exodus 19 records, went up into the clouds to meet the Lord, a remnant. And in Exodus 24, we also have the record of a remnant that went up. Verse 1, "And the Lord said to Moses, Come up unto the Lord, thou and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders." There were two meetings when the Lord descended out of heaven at a trumpet blast. One, Israel on the earth, and we find that in Matthew 24, don't we? But a remnant who in the New Testament were called virgins, Matthew 25, 1 to 6, they went to meet the Lord, didn't they? The bridegroom. In 2 Corinthians 11, Paul calls the believers of the Acts period a chaste virgin. And in 1 Thessalonians 4, they went up into the clouds, just like Moses and the 70, to meet the Lord as he came to the earth out of heaven. If we knew this pattern so clearly in our minds, we would certainly not be deceived by those who teach that the traditional rapture is the hope of the church. The rapture is here in type, in Israel's salvation, in the middle of the festive calendar, well, at Pentecost, the end of the first group. And if it was about Israel and the world here, then Matthew, Corinthians, and Thessalonians is about the same purpose of God in the New Testament. Now, here is something absolutely amazing. In Deuteronomy chapter 1, we are told very, very clearly that the journey from Mount Sinai to the southern border of the Promised Land, in other words, from Pentecost to trumpets, was 11 days. And I want to read it for you in Deuteronomy 1, verse 2 of chapter 1. There are 11 days' journey from Mount Sinai, or Horeb, by our way of Mount Seir, unto Kadesh Barnea. At Kadesh Barnea, the Lord told Israel through Moses to go in and possess the land. Recounting that incident, I read Deuteronomy 1:20, Moses recounting. "And I said unto you, You are come unto the mountain of the Amorites, which the Lord our God doth give unto us. Behold, the Lord thy God hath set the land before thee. Go up and possess it." Israel were told 11 days from Mount Sinai to go in and possess the kingdom. Of course, at Mount Sinai they had been rebellious and made a golden calf, but it doesn't matter. After they'd spent time there, 11 days, God took them here to the border, where trumpets would have taken place when well, we know that it was Joshua later that took them in. They wandered for 40 years, but Pentecost is tied with trumpets. Now in Leviticus 23, you can read that Pentecost is in the 3rd month. You can read that trumpets is in the 7th month. But God is teaching us in the type that trumpets will take place according to God's schedule. And that while His promise for this seed of Abraham to dwell in the land is unconditional, it's conditional as to response of these people. And when they came to trumpets at Kadesh Barnea, they were rebellious, were they not? Verse 29, I think, of this chapter says, is it rebellion in 29? No, 26. Notwithstanding, you would not go up, but rebelled against the commandment of the Lord your God. Pentecost led to Kadesh Barnea, the promised land. Told to go in and possess, toll for trumpets itself to take place. But they rebelled. And as you know, the nation of Israel wandered for 40 years in that wilderness. There was a delay, wasn't there? The trumpets could have taken place almost immediately. And that's what Pentecost as a type demonstrates to us. Exodus 19 about a kingdom of priests is really in the type about trumpets. God is joining them together. It's not just 11 days to demonstrate shortness of time. It's the very fact that Pentecost is about trumpets. The two are joined. But we know that in the New Testament, likewise, there wasn't a 40-year delay, was there? There was the Acts period, which took place just like this did. 30-odd, 5 years maybe. And what during the Acts period was the hope of the believers? It was trumpets, wasn't it? Trumpets. While there was a temporary delay in the New Testament, just as there was in the type, the hope was still trumpets. And what does that tell us? That despite the fact that Israel rebelled, despite the fact they crucified Christ, despite the fact He died on the cross at Passover for sin and sins, does not mean that God changed His purposes, that the Gospels and Acts are about the church going to heaven. No, they're not. The Gospel and the Acts are the fulfillment of these steps in perfect harmony. But at Acts 28, Israel nationally was put aside. They were let go. And God revealed a completely different purpose that has nothing to do with the festive calendar. Now we're going to move forward next time. I'm going to show a couple of charts and brought them together so you can see the Old Testament and the typical salvation of the nation of Israel, with the unfolding of these things in the Gospels and the Acts. And I am praying that you are seeing not just the things in the festive calendar that are for us, redemption through His blood and identification, but that you are seeing the different things, the dispensational things in the festive calendar, which are not about you and me today. And to God be the glory if you begin to see that we are not part of this called out company, we're part of the church, which is His body, raised and seated, not anywhere in a promised land, not in paradise, which is on the earth, but in heavenly places, as Ephesians chapter 2 tells us, where Christ is seated at God's right hand. The Lord bless you as you search and see.